You're listening to the Earth Experience Podcast.
Who are you?
Hi, I'm Kellie Snider. I am an artist and author living in Pittsburgh. My education is in behavior analysis, and I kind of just follow my creative whims wherever they go, and that's kind of how you ended up finding me because of the posts I'm doing lately.
Yeah, and I appreciate your post. I came across your post and I saw a few of them and I said, I would love to have a conversation with you because I've been waiting for this design moment. And what I mean by that is there are conversations that I think we avoid having with one another because we want to make sure that we don't say the wrong things or we don't mess up or there's some ignorance that's exposed about ourselves when we have these conversations. And so in the back of my mind, there are some disconnections that we make in the earth with one another, whether that's by race or gender or experiences, social class. But race always stands out to me because it seems silly. From growing up, I used to think, like, why are we focused so much on a color of someone's skin versus like the character, the content of their character? And naturally, these differences show themselves, but we kind of stay in our own circles. And so if you're in this circle, you identify with this color or this race or this group, everyone talks about other groups in that group, but not with one another. And you open that door with the type of content that you're sharing. But before we get into our creative circle today, I want to learn a little bit about your background, your upbringing, like how you even got to the point where you say you wanted to start posting the type of content that you're sharing. And for those who are listening, just kind of give some context to what your passions are from the art perspective, or both.
Yeah, I worked in animal welfare for a career, and when I left that field, I became a full-time artist and author. Although I've been doing those things all along, but now I just get to do it all the time. But as far as why I'm posting what I'm posting right now, I was really, and I know that a lot of people in the country were right there with me, but I was having some really bad emotional challenges dealing with Trump's presidency, especially the second time around. And it's just been like a few months ago, I decided I'm just going to go back through the history of this country and look at what it was that triggered us to become such a racist country. And I couldn't ever get to the beginning of it. It was like, there's not a beginning. It's just always been that way. And I had no idea because being a white person, just because being this white person that had my experiences, I remember learning about the Civil War in school and that kind of thing. And we were kind of just taught that after the Civil War, everything was fine. And then, we had a little bit of trouble with, of course, the civil rights movement. But then that got sorted out and everything was fine. And I'm like, then why, if everything was so damn fine, why do we have a white racist president that's openly racist in this country right now? And that was just why I started talking about it. And I realized that my knowledge was so stunted, I think, that I just wanted to dig in deep. I mean, I have an education, and so I'm like, I'm just going to use my skills for research and that sort of thing to dig in and figure out what I need to know about what I can do, what kind of difference I can make, since we already are established as the country we are. And I figured I can't teach Black people much about this. And that wasn't ever my intention, because I'm just really wanting to teach myself. But I thought, while I'm learning myself, I have the opportunity to share it with other people. And surely if I'm as uninformed as so, that other people might appreciate it too. I had no idea it was going to strike such a chord for me to start posting about it. It was really just, I started posting about it sort of to purge my soul a little bit. And once I started posting, I just started getting so many responses, primarily from Black people who were just glad some white person was talking about this stuff. Not that I say that I am not an expert in any of this. I am just a learner. I'm an explorer. And I kind of want to set the example to other people that you can start learning wherever you are. And so I kind of look at these issues through a behavioral lens, because that's my background is in behavior analysis. So I just kind of started pulling it apart. A lot of the posts that I have done so far have been historical, just because there's stories needed to be told. And of course, every time I post something, a whole bunch of people will say, well, we already knew that. And I'm like, yeah, but all of those white people over there, they didn't know it. So I'm trying to talk to them, the white people, because I feel like if we are more educated, we're going to do things better. But then the more I got into it and the more I started looking at it from a psychology point of view and a sociology point of view, I realized how completely woven into our culture this whole thing is and how intentional it was. I guess that was probably the biggest horror, was that how intentional all of these racial systems are to keep the wealthy, the elite, the white people in power and not really give a shit about anybody else. So that's kind of what I'll be rolling.
One thing that you mentioned that sticks out to me is the word purge. You wanted to purge yourself when you started. And I think this is significant because that journey to even having that desire to want to purge yourself is of interest. Just because there's so many different people who look like you or may identify as you, is there something that is connected to a belief system or maybe your upbringing or even your perspective that made you as a particular person outside of that space that made you tap into it?
I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian family, and I deconstructed, we didn't call it that back then because I didn't know anybody but me, that's 50 years ago. And there were things within that made me uncomfortable. We lived in a little town in Oklahoma. There were hardly any Black people there, so I didn't really come across Black people. I didn't go to my school, but there were a lot of indigenous people. So I had that aspect. And the words that came out of the authority figures' mouths, like ministers and parents and friends' parents and all that, teachers, were the right words that somehow I absorbed the words that they said. And I think just because there weren't a lot of Black people around, I didn't see the contradiction between the words that were being said and how people behaved. But then we moved to New Orleans when I was 13, 14. And in New Orleans, it's 50-50 Black and white. And so I'm going to school with a whole different population of kids. And I've still got this mindset, but then I see how people, including my family, they don't act the way those words that they taught us, they don't respond to the reality of being with a different kind of person in the way that those words said, that everybody's equal and all that kind of stuff. So I lived in New Orleans for another 14 years or so, went about my life, moved away, always lived in the South. And once I was pretty thoroughly out of Christianity, which happened very early in my 20s, I just did a lot of spiritual exploring. I looked into all kinds of different things, different religions, different sources of spirituality. Ended up being a Unitarian Universalist for 25 years, which I still kind of identify with because of its openness to a lot of different thought processes. But kind of towards the end of that time, I decided I was going through some grief with some deaths in the family and stuff. And I decided that I really wanted to dig more into meditation. So I found a meditation group in Dallas, where I lived at the time, and began studying Buddhism really deeply for about 10 years. And part of that practice is the idea of non-attachment and being able to let go of chasing thoughts down rabbit holes and stuff like that. The way we're taught in Buddhism is that there's a difference between suffering and pain. And you're going to have pain, you're going to have things happen to you, but you don't have to suffer because of it. That's a really difficult thing to get your head around when you're first starting. But as you meditate and develop a meditation practice, you are, well, at least the way I was taught, we were taught to kind of acknowledge our thoughts and let go of them, and acknowledge them and let go of them, and not do what humans have a tendency to do, which is like, I'm going to have this difficult thought, and then I'm going to either chase it completely down some rabbit hole and just waste a lot of time just being freaked out by it, or I'm going to completely block it off. I'm just not going to think about it at all. And so when I came up with this issue, and these years since Trump has been in our life have opened a lot of little windows like that, like what is my role in this? And how willing am I to look myself in the mirror and decide what I need to do about my life? Am I supposed to be doing anything? Should I be doing anything? Should I just sit down and shut up? Or more challengingly, it was like, what is it that I can do? Because I'm not an expert in this field. But what I am an expert in is being a learner and being, just because I'm curious about so many things, and I have a master's degree, so I'm used to exploring deeper thought processes. It's just gotten really intense with all this political stuff that's going on that's been so painful and so concerning that I decided that it was time to really explore myself, to really explore my point of view, and figure out all those questions, like, what should I be doing about this? What can I do about this? And my first thought was, well, I don't know. I really don't know the answer, but I can talk to people about it. And so I just started posting those posts on YouTube and Instagram, and apparently that is something that people want to talk about too. So I just feel like I'm very slowly starting to find other people who do this, but there aren't that many out there, I don't think. So I just feel like it's an opportunity for a lot of people to have their voices heard, and I'm continuing my purging and healing process, but it's really all about, how do I look myself in the mirror, see what my role in all these problems has been, and look at it without either going down some rabbit hole or hiding from it. And how do I face it and look at it and do something? So yeah, so that's kind of where I am. It came through all of my life experiences, being a mom, being a student, having different jobs, having my religious history that I've had. But all of that comes together into a life. So I don't really identify with any kind of spiritual practice right now, although Buddhism is definitely still a foundation in my life. And the practices of Buddhism, the meditation, the way of sitting with painful thoughts, sitting with painful experiences and not running away from them, has been a very powerful growth experience in my life. And so there's so many ideas that come up when I do these recordings. I have this huge list of ideas I'll never get through. And now people are offering me ideas in my comments. So I will never get to the end of all the things. So I just pick one that looks interesting that day.
Yeah.
And dig into it a little bit, post my little post about it, and then let people kind of give me feedback.
There were people who comment and said like, we already know about this. And this is going to take us into one of the videos we're going to review with one another that belong to you. But I thought that stood out because contrary to popular belief, everyone is not the same in one race, and everyone is not tapped into the same insight. So when I look at some of the content, I also am part of a system that probably was designed for me to see life a certain way. And I never even thought that it was so intentional. Like some of these theories about like why we are in the place that we are now seem like they're so bizarre that it cannot be true. They wove it into the system that much that and they have like a secret society. Like it feels like someone has a meeting, like they all taught it. Like in one of the videos that you were sharing your perspective, I kept thinking like, was there a meeting somewhere? And they all said like, this is how we're going to act with all the other people. And I just didn't know about it. Like I really didn't feel like I knew any of it. I just thought like, we're all in this together. We're all having our issues, all just like manipulated by something. And I thought it was just power and money. But when you get a little bit into the weeds of it all, it's like, if we really designed it this well, like why would you put so much passion into it where it seems like we would have better results if we did try working together? If we put our eggs in that basket of like working together, what is the outcome of one color or one organization having so much power and stomping on everyone else? Like, why does that even make you feel good? So I could not even imagine that anybody would want to do that, because I interact with people in America, right? I interact with people who don't look like me, who treat me with respect. And I'm thinking like, now, am I supposed to think they're going back into their room and talking about me? Because I'm not doing that to them. I think that they're a good person, or they were nice, or they were kind. And so then there's this other aspect of dealing with one another with these tense topics is you might come across like a white person who might be deconstructing, and they might come across a Black person who's like really mad and like, what do you mean you should know this, da, da, da. And it's like, well, what do you want them to do? Like, do you want them to sit there? Do you want them to learn? Like, we have to come to some understanding that we all been kind of like duped, and it's not going to help us by just being mad at each other over and over again.
That's been interesting, not surprising, I guess, but interesting that there are people who's like, of course you knew this. Of course you knew this. You can find this out. And that was like, I admit it. It was there. The information is there. I did not know to look for it.
Yeah.
And I now believe that we were, well, I just know just from, we were, white people are trained to be comfortable because it keeps us controllable. If we're comfortable, if everything's going right, we're not going to dig at issues, right? If everything's going fine for me, nobody's giving me any particular problems because I go out in the skin every day and I'm an old white lady. And I don't have anything anywhere further to go with that little thought, but it's unbelievable to me that I really do think that there was more of a plan. I think a lot of it happened accidentally. I think a lot of it just happened because of humans in our support systems, in our social networks and so forth. We do what everybody else does. The other day I looked at the beginning of the abortion thing. I just posted about that in the last couple of days. And then last night I watched that movie Bad Faith, a documentary, and they had the same guy, Paul Weyrich, and he had a specific plan to go in and create the moral majority and to do it in certain ways that would trick white evangelicals into supporting their other issues. Their main issue was preventing private Christian schools from being required to be integrated. That was their main issue. He admits it. The dude admits it. And white evangelicals they did studies that helps them figure out what topic can we get all these white evangelicals behind that we can then get them into this organization so they'll support all of our other issues. And that issue just happened to be abortion. It was not because they thought it was so terrible. It was not because they thought it was some moral issue, but they framed it that way because they wanted people to be so emotionally intense about the things that their organization was doing that they would vote with them on anything. And that is...
It's very creepy. That's the best description. It's creepy because it's like, when I see this, like when you say that disconnect, I think we see it in our own families, our upbringing. That's why I like social media, because you can kind of see people expose them. This decision to be like a learner online and just share that with people, I think that's helpful, as well as people coming online and just being exactly who they are or where they've been brought up to be, because we all get to put these pieces together. So when I look at like a content creator who says that they like follow faith or some type of like religion, but then their actions and their words are like so disconnected, it reminds me of what you were saying when you start to deconstruct, is that their words weren't matching what they say they were. And I always get tangled there, especially if somebody says that they are Christian with a lot of the belief systems that they tag on for political views. I'm always wondering, like, how are they political in this way and keep putting Christianity on it? It just seems odd because I don't see that in the book. I see something totally different. And even if I do see some things in the book that might be like questionable, there's all these other passages that do not align with what you're speaking. So do you not feel that disconnect?
Yeah, I totally hear you. Because I said in one of my videos that I'm an atheist and I know more about the Bible than a lot of people that comment to me, because they're able to somehow justify being pro-Trump and being pro-Jesus. And I don't see those two guys being aligned in any sort of way. So it's just crazy.
I'm going to navigate to one of the videos that we're going to talk about. And so for anyone that's listening to the podcast with us, I go through a framework called Growth. And so I'll put that framework in the description box below. But the idea is, when you're listening to any of the content, which Kellie mentioned in a lot of why she started her work, is you're looking for yourself inside the content. You're looking for anything that triggers you, any keywords or any questions that come up because of the review. So click and play now, and then we're going to discuss it with Kellie.
White churches have not just been supported by white supremacy, they have served as its headquarters. I know you don't want to hear that. They have taught white people that oppression is godly and that power belongs to us by divine right. After the civil rights movement, powerful white people, men, saw that their grip was slipping. Black people were winning court cases. Poor people were organizing. Women were demanding rights. How dare we? LGBTQ people were coming out of their closets. And the foundations of white male dominance were cracking. So they thought, what can we use that no one will question? In 1979, Jerry Falwell founded the Moral Majority. He said it was about championing family values. That was a lie. The real trigger was that the IRS had begun revoking tax exemptions for whites-only Christian schools. Those whites-only schools were created specifically to avoid integration. Falwell's own school, Liberty Christian Academy, was one of them. The platform of the Moral Majority ended up getting built around the issue of abortion. Although that wasn't the original plan, they basically test drove different topics to see which ones would resonate the most with the audience they needed to capture, which was white Americans, white Christian Americans. It had everything to do with maintaining the right to discriminate, yet still enjoy government benefits. This guy named Paul Weyrich, who was a conservative political strategist, he teamed up with Falwell to build a political base. He admitted that abortion had not really motivated white evangelicals until it became politically useful. Their real grievance was losing control over who could sit in their classrooms, walk into their churches, and live in their neighborhoods. Once they realized that abortion could mask their racial panic, they made that their headline issue. They built a movement that turned pulpits into propaganda platforms. Sunday services became political strategy sessions. That's illegal. You're not supposed to be able to do that at a church if you're getting tax exemption. Ministers told white families that their enemies were not the wealthy elites exploiting their labor. They were not the politicians cutting their wages and stealing their pensions. The churches pointed to the poor, the Black, the brown, the queer, the immigrant. Those people are the ones that are taking food out of your children's plate. They told white people they were being persecuted every time they were asked to share. And yes, I understand what it means for me to say this out loud. I know what it means to say that the church, something which is so sacred to so many, has been a central engine of the immoral institution of white supremacy. I know this will upset people. The white church has stood on the wrong side of every fight for justice in this country. Everyone. During slavery, it defended human ownership. During Jim Crow, it defended lynching and segregation. Christian church members attended lynchings and brought their children to steep them in that evil. During the civil rights movement, it defended denying benefits to Black people. During the rise of Trump, it defended cruelty in the name of religious liberty, as if Trump has a clue. Some churches resisted, yes. There are liberal churches who have a strong history of being on the right side of these issues, but most didn't. Most chose comfort. Even now, white churches help elect leaders who lie, steal, incite violence. They wage war on education. They call justice wokeness as an insult. They are consuming a message that keeps them at the center with the elite in their minds. They choose white power over compassion, over empathy. One share shows you care about setting the record straight. Please share. Next time, I am going to talk about how Donald Trump did not hijack the system. He was groomed into it.
So this is one of the videos that stood out to me for sure, because we're talking about churches, and one of the key words that you mention is the sacredness of the church. And one of the missions that I have, very similar to yours, actually, about just investigating my belief systems and taking whatever gifts I think that I have in expressing myself on social media, has had me explore the root of churches. And you mentioned that you were atheist. You also mentioned deconstructing. And then when we have news like this around churches, it does feel unsafe. Like, what do you trust now when church seemed like it was a trustworthy place? And for me, in my experience, I don't think I've ever came across a church, whether it was white, Black, or mixed, that made me feel like something else was happening behind the scenes. So this was something that I wanted to talk to you about, because things like that. Like, there's like a mission behind, like, one of the key words you were talking about in this message here was like how they're being taught, right? They told white people they were being persecuted every time they were asked to share. So that, to me, we're bringing out like definitive statements and like, this is what's going on, right? And the churches, which also like raises eyebrows for me, because I'm thinking like, why? Like, when I was talking about earlier, like those secret meetings, I'm just not, privy to it. So like when we talk about your comments as well, and they said everybody knows this, I'm Black and I don't know that. I mean, maybe that makes me foolish or is ignorant, but also I just haven't been exposed to it to know that it exists. But the question is, like, what do we do with it now? Like, we know this. Do we even believe there's opportunity for the white church to be redeemed? Because it seems like there's two different entities. There's the entity that's teaching people like you to be a certain way, and then there's the entity itself that has those thoughts and beliefs as their root, and they intentionally plan this. And like, how do we separate those two when we're trying to get us all to have a group conversation about it all?
From my perspective, I believe that it has to do with we all at the individual level have to decide what we're willing and able to do. I believe that just from doing this research and just from being raised so deeply in a religious group as a child and having a very religious family, I see in retrospect the insidious ways in which these things are taught. It's not like they say, we don't want integration, so blah, blah, blah. So you have to behave this way. They say it much more sneaky than that. It's and I don't know at what level somebody is aware that it's happening. I think a lot of small churches, the minister's as fooled as anybody else. Also, we have the issue of so many different Christianities within our culture. There's the Christianity, the big megachurch Christianity, and there's the affluence Christianity and the traditional Catholic or traditional fundamentalist. And there's all these different takes on the same thing. But they're people always talk about how people cherry pick their Bible verses to suit. I think you have to. I think that's the only way the Bible can work for anyone, is because you have to pick the parts of it that fit your narrative. Well, I'm saying this very bluntly because it's what I believe. I may be wrong, but it's not that we...
Yeah, no problem. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the second video, and just so we can get that content in the discussion as well. But these are the two content pieces that I wanted to highlight with our session today. But anyone listening, there are a lot of different talking points that you pull out on your page that I think is really helpful, whether you are someone who's white and trying to go through this journey in a similar manner as Kellie, or someone who's Black and just want to see the other side, be in that dinner table. And you might not have these type of conversations because, again, no one really comes to the conversation gently or knows how to start these conversations. We were all put into, the room together. But this is like one of those opportunities that we can use as conversation starters. So here's the next one.
When white people see my posts about racism in America, frequently they say, I didn't know. When Black people see these comments, they say, we already know. There is no way you didn't know. Don't pretend you didn't. This disconnect is really hard to explain. And I've been trying to understand it myself. I'm going to be digging into this really deep because I think it's so important. It's not that we're just oblivious white people. It's that we've been groomed to be oblivious white people. People point out that it's not like this stuff is locked in some vault somewhere. It's available. You can see it. And that's true. But we were trained not to ask questions. We were trained not to look for it. And I see it in my family. I see it in my circle of friends, even some of my friends that are pretty progressive. We have this ingrained training to not ask too many questions. We were taught to trust authority figures, teachers, ministers, police officers, politicians, the anchor guy on the evening news. We believed them because we were groomed from childhood to believe that they were trustworthy. We were not taught that the system itself, the system they were part of, was designed to protect itself first. And frankly, it felt good just to trust them. It's like you had this permanent mommy and daddy figure. It made life feel safe. The gaps in white knowledge were filled in with lies. We were told that poor people were lazy. That's why they're poor. That crime existed in Black neighborhoods because they were Black neighborhoods. That broken families cause poverty. These ideas were not questioned. They were treated as common sense. And we were started with our grooming as infants, as little tiny babies, as little bitty kids that are impressionable and just forming our ideas about the world. So that was our social foundation. We were told that Black people can't keep their marriages together. I was even told that the reason they couldn't keep their marriages together was because of how they were treated during slavery. So out of one side of their mouth, they'd say, wasn't that horrible that families were split up during slavery? But now that has just become part of who they are. And so it's their fault. I don't know. It didn't make sense to me either. We also were not told that welfare benefits were not available if there was a man in the house, a Black woman working 2 jobs who still needed support to raise her children, could not have a husband or partner living in the house with her. And of course, we were taught that that was their fault because they couldn't keep their marriages together. As we were growing up and we started to repeat these beliefs, we were seen as respectful and well-adjusted. I don't know, are you getting pissed off? I'm getting pissed off just going through this again. We were guided by the TV news and movies and TV shows to care when white people suffered and to disconnect from the pain of other people. We were taught to feel patriotic about our country without questioning whether they were being truthful with us about why we should feel such patriotism. We asked those white authority figures that we were taught to trust. We were lied to. Now that Black people give us honest answers, we don't fully trust them. It's not about ignorance. It's about conditioning. My education is in behavior analysis, and that's how that works. You just expose someone to a social system that supports a certain line of thinking, and you fall for it, especially if you are started out as a young kid being taught all that stuff. And that's what happens to all of us. We were taught that silence is polite and that truth about society is rude or inappropriate. And as a girl that went to a fundamentalist Christian church, that was even more so. You don't ask questions that are going to make people uncomfortable. But that comfort, you see, it kept us obedient. It kept us from asking too many questions. It kept us from wanting to do anything about it because we didn't fully understand that there was something that needed to be done. We were used to preserve a system that depended on our own silence. It kept us from befriending Black people. It kept us from knowing what the hell we thought we knew about those people. So when white people say, I didn't know about any of this, understand what that really means. We were trained not to look. We were trained to believe the stories that we were told by the authority figures. We were shaped by a system that used your trust against you. We were trained to look away. And now we have a choice. White people, we need to get angry about being kept in the dark all these years so that together with our Black neighbors and neighbors of all races, we can break down this oppressive system that has brought us here to the point of fascism. Check the caption for some documentaries to help you get started learning. We need to really get curious.
It makes more and more sense why people don't believe in anything, really, and we have to question everything. The key phrases that I'm going to start us off with is, one, he says, we were shaped by a system that used our trust against us. And I think that's an interesting place for all of us to sit, because it might sound in one ear to someone listening that, oh, like, was a victim, like we're the victims. But I think all of us are victim to some aspect of it. It's just the way that we were a victim to it. And the goal is we're all supposed to get to the victor side. Like, we can continue to say, like, I'm not a victim, or you can't act like a victim. But everyone seems to be a victim when I'm listening to your perspective, because that same sentiment can be in other places outside of the white race. We all kind of believe these things. It's almost, but it was different for like maybe Black people because everything that was white was good, right? And it seems like because you were white, you were a part of the making of this. But it's like that. That's why I wanted to go back to our first video. It's like that separate entity of the they, right? That seems like it's separate from both white and Black, because that they put together some systems, taught one group of people that they're more superior, and they believed it. And then that same system made another group of people make them feel less than, and they also believed it. So it's like we can sit there and we can try to figure out like who should be at fault. But it's like if we look at the full picture and zoom out, everyone was a victim in some capacity. But the way that it was designed and structured to make you feel like you're supposed to be against each other.
Yes, that was the key point, that as I was doing all this research going back to the beginning of the United States and even before, there was always an aspect of the elite, the powerful people, pointing to other groups of people, or two other groups of people at least, more, sometimes more, at each other and saying, you're the problem. Now it's the administration points at immigrants and says they're the problem. And throughout history, it's always been somebody, but the somebody is always somebody who is starting to speak up. It happened with women. I'm more familiar with the women's rights issues because I was part of that. But it happens whenever an elite, a powerful elite system wants control, and they always want control. That's what they are, is control mongers. But they want control, so they have to break up little groups underneath them so that they're constantly distracted by their battles with each other, the battles that were invented by the elite system. But they've got to keep them busy with that. I mean, it's what Trump never does a talk where he doesn't blame out someone like, oh, well, those immigrants, they're going to, whatever it is today that they're supposed to be doing. And so it's, but there's also, I think that one of the things that was the most surprising to me, and it had no business being surprising, but was that the group, which in this case of Race in America, I am a part of, there has to be a comfortable group. There has to be a group that thinks they're better than everybody else. And they have to create that. When you look back in the history of this country, like back to Bacon's Rebellion, poor white people and Black slaves or Black indentured people, servants, would team together and fight back. And they didn't like that. So they had to set them against each other. And that's always been, I'm sure if we went back in Europe, all the way back to the beginning of humans, somebody figured that out at some point, and it stuck because it works for them. And I mean, that's what it always boils down to, that works. So let's keep them fighting with each other, and then we can do whatever we want and just say that we're doing it because of the problems they're having with this other group.
Where in your study, do you identify, I think the elite conversation, it's so like foggy to me. Like people always talk about like this other entity and group. And in some cases, in like religious spaces, they make it seem like that's like demonic entities. And it seems like it's something outside of us, which is why in my experience, I do try to hold on to a faith, because it just seems like it's not us. It seems like it's a spirit. When you are in your studies and you identify elites, are there particular names behind these elites? Are they located here in America in some group and they just have all the money? Or is it just like this elite people someplace kind of like...
People talk about cabals and all that. I think it's probably unlikely, but I've never been up there. So I'm not really sure, but I think it's more disseminated. I may be totally wrong. Maybe that's an area that I need to really dig into, but I think that these systems work no matter where you put them, because human behavior works the same way. No matter where you put a framework, it's going to work the same way. It just is going to have different characteristics. So whether you want to keep women or gay people or Black people under control, you have to have somebody that's a little bit above them, that thinks they're better than them, so that you can teach that group that everybody else is the problem. That has the effect of teaching all the groups that the others that are more on their level are more of a problem than the people that kind of come down from above and have all the power. But when you look at It's kind of almost easier to see in the United States right now, because throughout our history, we've always had this language of benevolence in the country. Like, this is such a good and kind country, at least for white people, it's been that way. And it's a fine country. We're, the most respected in the world. But right now with Trump, he doesn't care. He doesn't even try to make us look kind or wise or anything. He just does what he wants because he knows he's got that other system set up. I hesitate to give him that much credit because I think it's not him. I think it's his keepers. I think he has people that are more in charge of things than he is behind the scenes, which is probably getting more back to what your point was. But is there like some overarching organization that is in charge of it all?
Because it's interesting when people talk about Trump, because I don't know this man. I see, because one of the things that you brought out in your content is like you're also being shaped by the media, trusting the media. So I think that is something that my grandma has taught me, is to turn off the TV because there's so many different, there's something behind, what we consume on TV. And I don't think I replaced it well with social media, but I just know how to craft it a little bit better. But because I don't know much about him and I just hear like snippets of him, I try my best to just be a listener, like to understand like where people like him and where they don't like him and where their fear is with him, and then listening to his actual words. And I always go back to what you mentioned in your videos of being formed by these ideas as a baby. And I remember in one of my pieces of content, like Trump was a baby at one time, formed by his beliefs. But like, when you have a baby, it's like, oh, look at the baby. Someone, I don't know, but probably looked at Trump as a little baby, thought he was cute, pinched his cheeks. He grew up to be an adult that also possibly is the same victim, or is he, like, it seems like there might be even tiers to this, right? It's like the tiers would be, maybe I'm a white person that was influenced by this, but I was somehow able to tap into this is wrong because I started to deconstruct my faith. Maybe I'm a white person who was manipulated in a way, but I'm comfortable and I'm fine with being comfortable because that's just not my character. And another white person could be like, yeah, I totally feed into this, like, because I don't have any structure around me. I didn't even have any moral system that really guided me anyway. So so it seems like there's different tiers. And I'm assuming that Trump falls into one of those tiers that I can't really put a lot of description to, because even in this space, when we talk about understanding the background of how you get here with your thoughts, he would also be in that bucket, but in a certain way.
From what I do know about his childhood, his upbringing, it was not great. It was, there was a lot of neglect, and he saw his brother in particular being mistreated. I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but it seems to me like he was pretty well set up to believe that he deserved the very best things in life and not care at all whether anybody else got them. So I do think that there's a chain of behavior that he was raised in somehow to be a person who can do the things that he does and do them openly without shame, even though they're hurting other people, whether that means that he's a sociopath it's a mental illness, or whether that means he was just raised that way and influenced that way throughout his life. Probably maybe some of both. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know. I don't know about that side of thing, but I do think that definitely things that he's lived with that, and just using him as an example, we all carry our experiences with us and make what we're going to make out of them. So
that's a really strong point. I think it ties back into how you came into your content with all your mixed experiences and lived experiences. I know we're at time. I'm not sure if you have a hard stop. So I just have this one final question, unless you have any takeaways, and that's related to your lived experiences themselves. And I know you mentioned deconstruction, and you also communicated that you were atheist. Was there something that stood out? Was it just that you saw the mixed match between what people were seeing in the churches or in your family, or was there something in you that didn't have any spiritual connection to what you are practicing or reading in the Bible? How did you tag on to I'm going to be an atheist? What made you make that final decision?
It was a very, very difficult process, because I was raised, that you go to hell if you do the bad things, and you go to heaven if you do the good things. And there was a lot of shame involved in how I was raised. But what it really boiled down to was when I got to be in my teens, and I started asking questions just about things that were in the Bible and how my church taught them. They weren't the same thing. I could read something in the Bible and it would say, I remember one issue was about the gifts of the Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And why can't we perform miracles? I asked something about that. They had an answer that was part of their theology, that you had to get it handed down directly from one of the apostles or something like that. I don't quote me on that, because that's probably not right. But they had an explanation, but it didn't add up. It didn't match what their scripture said. And so the more I grew up, the more, as I was growing and I was thinking and I was having these thoughts and I would ask questions, it got to the point where I was getting the answer that I shouldn't even be asking about that. I should just have faith. And when you have faith, but there's nothing to put the faith on, it's okay, they should be able to tell me why I should have faith. Nobody could. It was just because God loves you. And I was well, if God loves me, why did these things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? So I just wasn't getting the answers I wanted. So I went back, I read through the Bible 2 or 3 times and just dissected it and asked questions and asked myself, and none of it added up for me. The good part that I bring away from my religious upbringing, there were 2 parts. One was just that there was a community there. And that was what led me to join the Unitarian Church when I was an adult and had my own children. But the other thing was, our church didn't believe in instrumental music in the church building. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have pianos or organs or anything. So we all learned how to sing in 4-part harmony. And I love that I can sing in 4-part harmony. And so that was the other good thing. But as far as, I didn't feel that the moral stuff that I got out of religion had to be seated in morality. And in fact, once I finally got to the point where I can release my identity as a Christian and just be me as a person trying to be a good person, it became easier to be moral, because I was choosing morality because it worked and not because I was afraid I was going to get punished. And that's what it really boiled down to.
Well, Kellie, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with me. I probably could talk to you for more hours, but I know you have to get back to life. Is there anything you want to share before we go? And also, as you share your social media platforms where people can find you, or any websites where your books are located?
My social media is, I'm on TikTok and Instagram, and I'm KellieSnider.art on both of those. So the spelling is important. Kelliesnider.art. And you can find me that way. I'm also on Facebook, but I don't have as big of a presence, as big of a following there. So that would be the best way to get in touch with me.
Wonderful. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this conversation and experience with Kellie. I definitely did. Thank you for taking the time again. If you're listening, hold on to you as much as you can. Hold on to your health, your well-being, and your mind. Be mindful. Bye.